Welcome to part 3 of our series on the Serapeum. If you've already watched parts 1 and 2, then thank you so much for tuning into this entire 3-part series. If you haven't seen them yet, we definitely recommend you to go back and watch the entire series so you can get the full scope of the research that we've done. It'll really give you some deeper context to better understand the Serapeum and help to clarify a lot of misunderstandings and dispel many of the so-called mysteries told by alternative researchers out there. There are so many sensational claims being made across the internet, the main one being that the Serapeum was originally built by an advanced civilization perhaps many thousands of years before officially recorded history, using forms of lost ancient high technologies and precision machinery, and that they used the site for some sort of technological function. This alluring narrative sounds exciting, but our thorough investigation has led us to see that there is little evidence to support these claims, and that this site was indeed made by the dynastic Egyptians. In this video, we'll discuss the historical documents they left behind inside these tunnels that proves it decisively. Just to be clear, we used to support the lost ancient technology theory, and during our trip to Egypt, we were trying to make sense of the ancient world through this type of alternative lens. But through our exhaustive research on this YouTube channel, we've come full circle to realize that the claims about lost technologies in ancient Egypt are just not true. We've followed the evidence, which has led us to simple explanations about the creations of sites like the Serapeum, which was simply a holy necropolis for the Egyptians' most sacred animal, the Apis bull. In our part 1 video, we showed that primitive stone cutting techniques are sufficient to explain how these sarcophagi were created, and that no machine technology is needed to make them. And in part 2, we discuss where these stones were quarried from, and the physical evidence that was found in the form of wooden rollers, wooden winches, and double rails that proved how the sarcophagi were transported into the tunnels. In this episode, we'll take you on a journey through the Egyptians' hieroglyphic records of the entire history of the Serapeum, which proves that they were the people that made this necropolis, as they recorded many details about its construction over more than 13 centuries.
Many people speculate that these huge stone sarcophagi and the large tunnels of the greater galleries were made many thousands of years ago by a very ancient, advanced civilization, and that the Egyptians merely found this site later on, adopted it as their own, and then added smaller and cruder chambers of the lesser galleries as Apis bull burials during their epoch. But when you follow their hieroglyphic records, it becomes clear that it's actually the other way around. The Egyptians first began burying bulls in the smaller chambers of the lesser galleries and wooden sarcophagi, and as time went on, they constructed increasingly more grandiose burials expanding from east to west, resulting in the grand galleries containing the nicest chambers and stone sarcophagi that came later on. Many popular YouTubers have completely overlooked the historical accounts written on the Serapeum, which we find surprising, as they're teaching alternative theories without even understanding the breadth of scholarly work that's been done on this site over the past 170 plus years. Yusuf Awiyan, a well-known proponent of the lost technology theory and one of the primary alternative tour guides in Egypt, says that the name of the Serapeum only comes from inscriptions on 3 sarcophagi, which refer to Osiris and Apis. He is a main source of a lot of the lost technology claims on the internet, and is featured on many YouTube channels, but he doesn't seem to be aware of the thousands and thousands of artifacts that were found here, many of which were inscribed with prayers and legends of the gods Osiris and Apis. While we were in Egypt, we actually reached out to Yusuf and met him for an interview, because we actually used to be totally on board with a lot of the alternative theories, and he seemed to us to be a very kind, generous, and good person. That doesn't mean we agree with him now, though. The evidence we found in our research makes us question the alternative narratives promoted by Yusuf and other alternative researchers, and we see now that most are just baseless claims that fall apart under close examination. When Auguste Mariette entered the tunnels in 1851, he was astonished to find 12 or 1,300 stone stelae, inscribed with hieroglyphics commemorating the lives of the 64 Apis bulls that were buried here. The stone tablets give detailed information about the names of the bulls, the exact dates of their births and deaths, the month, day, and year they were buried and during the reign of which pharaoh, the roles that the priests played in the funerals, the priest's family ancestry, and some even tell of how many months and days it took the workers to excavate a new burial chamber and transport a sarcophagus into it. These dedicatory monuments give historians what is surely one of the most valuable chronological records that has ever been found in one archaeological site. This significant discovery filled in many of the gaps that various other kings lists had previously left open. Extensive work has been done through the years to translate the stelae, which help to precisely date the reigns of the pharaohs during a period of more than 1,300 years, from the New Kingdom in the 14th century BC, all the way down to the Hellenistic or Ptolemaic Kingdom around 30 BC.
The official royal stelae were originally embedded in the brick walls that sealed off each individual chamber, and the majority of the other stelae were deposited in the tunnels or embedded in the walls near the main entrance, either by the Apis priests that made the burials or by pious visitors. Mariette found some of them still embedded in the walls, and the rest had been torn down and were laying in a dreadful disorder on the floor, along with thousands of other artifacts like funerary statuettes of humans, gods, bulls and scarabs, canopic jars, vases, amulets, large quantities of gold leaf and golden objects, many fragments of wooden coffins, and a plethora of other artifacts. His excavations of the Serapeum led to the discovery of about 7,000 artifacts in total. In the lesser vaults, he found about 800 stone stelae, and in the greater vaults, he found around 400 or 500 more, most of which were shipped off to the Louvre Museum in France. Most of the 400 or so that were sent to the Bulaq Museum in Cairo were unfortunately destroyed by flooding from severe inundations of the Nile, and sadly only 30 of them remain today. In this video, we're going to walk you through the entire historical timeline that was recorded on these stelae, showing you exactly when and by whom each Apis burial was made, pharaoh by pharaoh, dynasty by dynasty, chamber by chamber, from the beginning all the way to the very end of the Serapeum. We'll be referencing many fantastic scholarly works written over the past 170 plus years, especially Auguste Mariette's seminal book, The Serapeum of Memphis, which we translated into English and uploaded to archive.org so you guys can read it too. We'll also be referencing Mariette's other works on the Serapeum, these papers written by Aidan Dodson, the works of Heinrich Brüsch in these books, this paper by Mohammed Ibrahim and David Roll, the works of Baptist Comgun in this book, and many others. You can find all of these in our massive compilation of links we pieced together in a Google document that's linked in the description below. We encourage you to go through and read some of these books and papers written on the Serapeum, as there's so much to learn from them. Also, if you enjoy our work, please consider supporting us on Patreon or tipping us with some Bitcoin, as it really helps us continue making videos like these.
The Apis bulls were worshipped by the Egyptians since at least the First Dynasty, beginning potentially more than 5,000 years ago and continuing all the way through to the very end of dynastic Egypt's 3,000-year civilization. The bulls were worshipped as the physical representation on Earth of the god Apis, and were also seen as the embodiment of the creator god Ptah. When the bulls died, they transcended the physical plane as Osiris, the god of the afterlife and lord of eternity. The continual cycle of reincarnation of the Apis bulls in the physical form was extremely sacred to the ancient Egyptians, as it continually reenacted the perpetual cycles of life, death, and resurrection, and was considered paramount that this ritual be maintained throughout time. The average lifespan of the bulls was around 20 years, although some lived much shorter lives. Throughout the 1,300-year-plus history of the Serapeum, at least 64 bulls were officially recorded to have been ritually buried here. During their lives, they lived like royalty in the Temple of Apis in Memphis, and were revered as the protector god of the ancient city. Upon death, their bodies were carefully mummified like a pharaoh during a 70-day period, and ceremoniously brought down the long avenue lined with sphinxes from Memphis into the tunnels of the Serapeum, and ritually sealed up in their chambers along with treasures, statues, canopic jars, and other sacred offerings. The priests of Apis would then fast during the day, and the whole country would remain in a state of mourning until the next reincarnated Apis bull was found somewhere within the kingdom, when the population would then rejoice in the resurrection of the god. As we learned from Herodotus, the reincarnated bull had to be a newly born calf that bore specific sacred markings, like an inverted triangle on its forehead, a white bird shape on its back, double the amount of hairs in its tail, and a knot in the shape of a scarab beetle under its tongue. The Serapeum is located beneath the sands of Saqqara, which was a very ancient and sacred necropolis that was used for more than 3,000 years, not only for pharaohs and the 17 pyramids built there in their memory, but also for high officials and non-royal burials, as well as many different animals. It's very appropriate, then, that the Egyptians chose to bury their most sacred animal deity in this location.
The first Apis tombs were dug here in the 18th and 19th dynasties, almost 3,400 years ago. It appears as though there was no plan at that point to create a connected tunnel network of tombs, as the burials were made in 7 isolated chambers, irregularly placed here and there. They each contained a small chapel with columns and reliefs above them, and a sloping passageway leading down to an underground chamber. When Auguste Mariette entered these tombs in the 1850s, he found 4 of them completely undisturbed, while the other 3 had been ransacked in ancient times. He dated the burials from the artifacts he found that were inscribed with the king's names, including canopic jars, magic bricks, amulets, jewelry, glass pendants, golden artifacts, more than 250 Shabdi figurines, a life-size gilded wooden figure of Osiris, and 13 stone stelae. A handful of chambers contained either intact wooden coffins or broken pieces of them, some of which were inscribed. Some had vaulted lids or were placed in a lidless outer stone sarcophagus, and one was varnished in black resin with its lower section covered in gold leaf. Several contained random collections of bull bones, some of which were broken. One contained a bull's skull wrapped in linen. All of it rested on the black bituminous remains of their bodies that disintegrated from the slightest touch, according to Mariette, who also found jars containing ashes and burned bones. Some scholars speculate that because they were dismembered and not mummified whole, that they may have been partially consumed by Apis priests in the ceremonial feast prior to their burials. Several of the chambers had smooth plastered walls covered in paintings of scenes like the 4 sons of Horus making offerings to the Apis bull, and of Ramses II and his son Kamwaset making offerings to an anthropomorphic version of Osiris Apis, in the lower section of the wall covered in exquisite gold leaf. In the book Divine Creatures, Aidan Dodson's chapter called Bull Cults contains the most comprehensive chronology and detailed map of all the Apis burials that we're aware of. He gives the inventory numbers of the artifacts that were found, some of which we've located in the photo archives on the Louvre Museum's website. To summarize the timeline of the oldest isolated vaults, burials were made during the 18th dynasty in Chamber A by Thutmose I, son of Amenhotep III, in Chamber B by either Amenhotep or his other son Akhenaten, in Chamber C by Tutankhamun, in Chambers D and E by Horemheb, and during the 19th dynasty in Chamber F by Seti I, and 2 burials in Chamber G by Prince Kamwaset, the 4th son of Ramses the Great.
Somewhere around 1230 BC, Kamwaset, a high priest of Apis, ordered that a larger and more elaborate catacomb of connected tombs be constructed, and this is when the lesser vaults were started. The entrance was about 15 meters northwest of the isolated tombs, and its staircase ran west, then turned south, and then east where it descended into the main chamber, which began as a long rectangular hall supported by 5 pillars. It's really hard to find photos from inside these vaults, but during our research, we managed to get in touch with and do a Zoom call with the author of the Bull Cults paper, and Professor Dodson generously shared a bunch of photos he took inside the lesser vaults when he was granted permission to enter them some years ago. His knowledge about the Serapeum is vast, and we really enjoyed speaking with him and receiving some great insights about this site's long history. Because of the terrible mess that Mariette found in the lesser galleries, with misplaced stelae and artifacts thrown about in a heaping mess, it's difficult to precisely attribute several of the burial chambers to specific pharaohs. While the general chronology is quite well understood, there are still a few discrepancies among scholars. The general conspectus is as follows. The first 5 burials in the new gallery were made during the long reign of Ramses II, in chambers I, 1, and K, and the last burial of the 19th dynasty was in Chamber 2 by the pharaoh Siptah. Then during the 20th dynasty, also called the Ramesside period, burials were made in chambers 3, L, M, and most likely N by Ramses III, 6th, 9th, and 11th. Several chambers that were dug one layer beneath all the rest were too dangerous for Mariette to venture into for very long, as the foundations of their walls were crumbling, so there are several mystery bulls, 3 of which may have been buried in Chamber O. Egypt then entered the 3rd intermediate period, when 7 burials were made during the 22nd dynasty in chambers 3, P, Q, and R by the pharaohs Tekelot I, Osorkon II, Shoshenq III, Pami, and Shoshenq V. A burial was done in chamber S by the 24th dynasty king Bakenranef, and 3 more by the 25th dynasty kings Shabaka and Taharka, and most likely the chambers 4, 5, and T. And the last burial made in the lesser galleries was done by the pharaoh Samtik I of the 26th dynasty, also in chamber T. At some point in history, the ceiling collapsed right here in the middle of the main vault, blocking access to the northern tombs. When Mariette excavated the lesser galleries, he blasted through this huge pile of rubble with gunpowder and was surprised to find that, directly underneath the collapsed ceiling, there was a preserved burial with what he believed to be the human mummy of Prince Kamwaset. The coffin was dug just deep enough into the floor that it survived the explosion and was still mostly intact. The mummy wore this golden funerary mask and this amazing gold pectoral inlaid with precious stones, and there were other artifacts and jewelry discovered in this burial as well. Academics like Aidan Dodson are convinced that this was not the mummy of Kamwaset, but actually the mummy of a bull arranged into a simulacrum, or representation of Kamwaset, a known practice found in other bull burials as well. The remains have since been lost, so we may never know the answer to this unless Kamwaset's mummy is discovered somewhere else.
It's debatable exactly when the ceiling collapsed. However, some speculate it could have been during the period in between the two Apis burials made by Psamtik I, in the 20th and 52nd year of his reign, as it was during that time that he decided to abandon Kamwaset's older galleries and create what would eventually become what are known today as the Greater Galleries. Just south of the entrance, he opened a new doorway and excavated a new east-west oriented vault that branched off from the original north-south axis and buried a bull in Chamber U. Mariette found a stone stela in this chamber that recorded this new construction project. It reads, "In the year 52, under the reign of this god, information was brought to his majesty. The temple of thy father Osiris Apis, with what is therein, is in no choice condition. Look at the sacred corpses, and what a state they are. Decay has usurped its place in their chambers." Then his majesty gave orders to make a renovation in his temple. It was made more beautiful than it had been before. It then explains how they embalmed the Apis with spices, adorned it with the best fabrics, and decorated the chamber with the best sorts of wood. It's pretty amazing that they documented occurrences like this, and that we can quite accurately date the continually expanding construction project that was underway, based on the timeline of burials made by the different pharaohs. Psamtik's reign officially marked the beginning of the late period of Egyptian history, when the 26th dynasty, also known as the Said dynasty, was the last native dynasty to rule Egypt before the Persian conquest in the year of 525 BC. From that moment on, the chambers were made to be bigger and better than before, and to quote Mariette, "This part of the tomb is by far the most beautiful, the most ornate, the one which testifies most to the favor enjoyed by Apis, beginning with the flourishing reign of Psamtik." This section of the Greater Galleries is behind a modern locked gate that you can only gain access to with special permissions, and we actually didn't get a chance to go back there, but this footage from Uncharted X gives a glimpse into what it looks like. These next three burial chambers, V, X, and W, were excavated by the 26th dynasty kings Necho II, Wahibre, and Nemesis II. They contained wooden sarcophagi which Mariette only found fragments of, and the one in Chamber W would have been sunken about a meter into this niche in the floor. Chamber X contains this large broken granite slab in the shape of a false door, and Chamber V is mostly empty with broken rubble laying about. For the second Apis that died under King Amasis, he decided to step it up a notch and create the Serapeum's first ever giant stone sarcophagus made of Aswan red granite in Chamber Y. What's really cool is that he even inscribed right into the stone that he was the first king to ever do so. The beautifully made sarcophagus contains elaborate panels and excellently preserved inscriptions of dedications to Osor Apis, as well as a spell from the funerary texts. Its lid sits around the corner near the modern entrance, and the inscription on top of it reads, "King Amasis dedicated his monument to the living Apis, a great sarcophagus of granite. Now his majesty found that it had not been made in a costly stone by any king at any time, that he might be one who was given life forever." This was also recorded on this official royal stela in the Louvre Museum that was originally embedded in the stone wall that sealed up this chamber. These hieroglyphs clearly state that he had a great sarcophagus of rose granite made for him because his majesty found that it had not been made in a costly stone by any king at any time. In this book from 1926, the Egyptologist Batiscombe Gunn wrote that, "Thus Amasis, in providing Apis with a sarcophagus of costly stone, announces in two documents that such a thing had never been done before his time. The term costly stone would include in this connection granite, basalt, diorite, and doubtless also calcite. The statement is evidence that the sarcophagus dedicated by Amasis is the earliest of those now visible in the Serapeum, for they are all of costly stone." So for anyone who still doubts that the Egyptians made these stone sarcophagi, they even documented exactly when and by whom the first one was made. It's literally inscribed right there onto the lid itself, and we can accurately date this burial to about 547 BC. From this moment on, all successive burials in the Serapeum, except for one, were made exclusively in stone sarcophagi.
The next one was made after the Persian Empire invaded Egypt by the new pharaoh Cambyses of the 27th dynasty, and his box was strangely abandoned in the doorway here, blocking the entrance between the older and newer vaults. It is the big one in the back corner and is probably the largest box in the Serapeum. It lies on a layer of sand and is just behind the entrance into the lesser galleries. According to the writings of Herodotus, Cambyses was a total madman who, upon his return from a military campaign, was disgusted that the country people were celebrating not his safe return, but the mortal flesh and bone of the newly discovered Apis bull. He motioned to stab the bull in the stomach, but instead he sliced its thigh, which eventually led to its death. And this sad story is possibly the reason why the box got abandoned here in the entranceway, although it's not entirely clear what happened. It's difficult to get to the bottom of this, but in our talk with Dodson, he said he believes that the workers actually miscalculated the size of the box, which turned out to be too big to effectively move around the 90-degree corner. Some scholars speculate that Herodotus exaggerated the malevolence of Cambyses, as he got his accounts from Egyptian priests who disdained the Persian rulers. Other sources tell of Cambyses actually carrying forth the tradition of Apis in a respectful manner, and there are stelae showing Cambyses venerating the Apis bull. The sarcophagus was likely intended to be placed in this large chamber A. The top of its lid contains an inscription with the characteristics of cheap and hasty work, which is in utmost contrast to that of the Amasis box. It reads, "King of Upper and Lower Egypt, son of Re, Cambyses, may he live forever. He dedicated his monument to his father Apis Osiris, a great coffin of granite." The following Apis bull lived an extremely short life, and the next Persian pharaoh, Darius the Great, also of the 27th dynasty, had to work hastily to bury the bull in chamber B. This is where things get really interesting. Since Cambyses' box blocked the newer entrance to the greater galleries, Darius decided to radically remodel the original entrance staircase to the underground chambers that had remained unchanged for more than 700 years. Who knows why he didn't just widen the tunnel a little bit and move Cambyses' box into its intended chamber, but instead he chose to carve out a whole new entrance. Perhaps the Apis priests thought that Cambyses' burial was cursed or something, or maybe since the sarcophagus had already been sealed, they felt it would have been disrespectful to move it with the Apis inside, so they just left it there. This is the original entrance highlighted in yellow, and Darius carved out this new staircase highlighted in red, made 2 right-angle turns, and literally sliced right through the old staircase, which resulted in it having only 3 remaining steps, and then a sheer vertical drop-off of 10 meters. The new passage still allowed for entrance into the lesser galleries this way, and this new staircase was added that descended into the greater galleries through here. Mohammed Ibrahim and David Roll's paper, Apis and the Serapeum, discusses all of this in depth. They were the people who rediscovered the original staircase during their excavations in the 1980s, when they were the first people to re-enter the lesser galleries since Mariette's time 135 years prior. Interestingly, Mariette made no mention of the original staircase in his plan of the site. In their photo, as well as Dodson's photo, you can clearly see the 3 remaining steps and then the sudden 10-meter vertical drop-off to the bottom of the passage. When we took these photos during our visit, we weren't exactly sure what we were looking at, but now we recognize this pillar of stone as the remaining bedrock that separates the 2 staircases, and we're actually standing on top of the sheer drop-off, which is now buried in sand. Google Maps Street View shows some pretty great angles of the interwoven entranceways, which is pretty cool to navigate around and check out the different views. Here's the modern passage where tourists enter today, and as you turn left through here, you can see the original staircase that ran along here into the old vaults. Here's Darius's 90-degree turn renovation entrance here, along with the bedrock pillar. Here are a few more views that show the whole layout quite well.
This doorway is the original entrance into the lesser galleries, which is now sealed off with bricks. Dodson's photo shows it with the sand and the bricks removed, revealing the modern metal door that locks the tunnels shut. This arched entrance to the right is the first entrance into the grand galleries that Samtik created in the 26th dynasty, which is blocked just behind these bricks by Cambyses' sarcophagus. Darius's makeshift new doorway is just behind to the right of that one over here, which we didn't see because it's buried in sand. That doorway leads you into the grand galleries just in front of Chamber W. In this footage from Uncharted X's video, while looking out directly across from that chamber, you can clearly see Darius's entrance staircase, which today is also blocked by a modern gateway. Here's another view of that staircase from one of Dodson's photos. We're happy we tracked all of this down so we could make better sense of the site, as we find the multiple entrances to be so fascinating. These renovation projects clearly demonstrate different phases of construction that have greatly helped scholars understand the chronology of the Serapeum's long history. Dodson's map shows the different building phases marked out by these different colored sections. Interestingly, it actually appears that Darius only ever intended for this to be a makeshift entrance, as the first Apis bull of his reign lived an extremely short life, and he had to rush to bury it quickly in Chamber B. This is perhaps why this third stone sarcophagus made in the Greater Galleries was of poorer quality craftsmanship, compared to the previous two, as well as most of the following ones. During the next 30 years of his reign, Darius carried out yet another large renovation project and had the main entrance ramp extended again into this blue section leading about 17 meters straight beyond where the old stairs turned off to make a considerably larger and wider tunnel, which is where we enter today. Stela 4039, which is in the Louvre Museum, actually documents that this construction project took place. It's pretty hard to find information about this stela, but we managed to track down and translate sections of this book by the French Egyptologist Jean Vercouter to verify the translation. In the year 34, the second month of Peret, the 11th day, of the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Darius, he did what pleases the living Apis, so that he gives it life and stability. His Majesty ordered that his tomb be built to cause the sarcophagus to be placed there. The passage leading to it was opened, and from the end of the passage which had been made by the ancestors. In his book, Vercouter verified that it was in fact under Darius I that the underground passages were enlarged. They are effectively an extension of the path dug under the 26th dynasty from the end of the passage made by the ancestors. We feel that the evidence we just reviewed is solid proof of exactly when and by whom the Greater Galleries were originally created and then extended multiple times, and that this rules out the hypothesis that the Greater Galleries were created before the Lesser Galleries.
The blue section outlines the new phase of burials made between the 27th and 31st dynasties and the larger and more uniform chambers inside the new tunnel. Darius made 2 burials in chambers A and C, although no stone sarcophagus was given to the now empty chamber A. Dodson speculates that the bull lived a very short life, so Darius had to rush to bury it and chose this empty chamber as a last-minute option, which was likely originally made for Cambyses' Apis. Mariette found inscribed stelae that documented burials made through this time period in chambers E through J, and while he did not allocate specific chambers, it's fair then to place in chronological order that burials were made during the 27th dynasty by either Xerxes or Artaxerxes in chamber E, and by Darius II in chamber F, by the 29th dynasty pharaohs Neferud and Hakkor in chambers G and H, by the 30th dynasty pharaohs Nectanebo I and II in chambers I and J, and finally the mysterious 31st dynasty pharaoh Kabash, who placed this small sarcophagus in chamber D, here at the mouth of this unused tunnel that was abandoned. A possible theory for this tunnel is that Darius I had intended to excavate a new set of tombs leading south in the consistent direction of his extended entrance tunnel, and perhaps to follow the original north-south axis of the older galleries, but that plan was abandoned and the gallery appears to have been left unused. Little is known about Kabash, but he gained control as a pharaoh after leading a rebellion against the Persians and had a short reign of only 3 years during a very turbulent time in history. This sarcophagus is remarkably small by Apis standards, perhaps either because the bull died when it was still a small calf, or because of urgent efforts during the time constraints of Kabash's short reign. Mariette found its lid around the corner nearby, and it contains a small dedicatory inscription on it that lists Kabash's name as well as the year the Apis died. Mariette also found the rose granite lid to a Mesis sarcophagus separated from its chamber around the corner in the newer tunnel. For many years, this lid blocked the passage, and stone steps were built by modern explorers to climb over it, but at some point it was turned and moved out of the way so that people can walk around it. Since the burial predates this section of the new tunnel, the question arises as to how it got there. Did someone in antiquity try to remove it from the tunnels? After Alexander the Great conquered the Persian-controlled Egypt in 332 BC, the Greek Ptolemaic kingdom was then established and would persist for the following 275 years as the last dynasty of ancient Egypt. The Hellenistic period marked a distinct architectural era in the Serapeum, highlighted in green, and in order to make a fresh start, the Greeks excavated this new tunnel that bypassed the older vaults and began a new series of chambers 50 meters past chamber J. These sarcophagi were all made to a very high standard and placed in consistently large chambers. Mariette found inscribed stelae which produced a complete list of 13 bulls that correspond remarkably well with these 13 chambers, although it's not really clear which bull was buried in which chamber. The records tell of burials made by Ptolemy the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 8th, 9th, and 12th, as well as Cleopatra the 7th, who was the famous last pharaoh before the Roman conquest led to the official demise of dynastic Egypt.
An amazing inscribed stela was found in this tunnel section that describes how long it took an architect to excavate a new chamber and transport a sarcophagus into it. In this book from the 1880s, the Egyptologist Heinrich Brugsch wrote extensively on the translations of many stelae like this one. We translated this section from German, where he wrote that, "The text in question contains the simple account of an unnamed master builder, who towards the end of a reign of a Ptolemy had carried out larger buildings on the Serapeum of Memphis. He speaks self-introduced and seems to look at his works with just pride in the manner of a good artist." The architect declares that he built several walls and entrance gates in the courtyards of the temple, and he even gives their exact dimensions in cubits from north to south and east to west. He goes on to say that I sent for the materials for the interior and the substructure of the burial cave of Apis from the Khao Ta Ranen, which had appeared in an illegible city in the district of Sais. He gives the exact time period between the specific years, months, and days for the living Apis of the Apium. I built the above-mentioned burial cave. He gives the exact dates and length of the construction project. I had the sarcophagus of Apis and its lid brought into the tomb during a period of 1 month and 5 days, of which 7 days that were not worked remain as a remainder of 28 days. I completed the burial cave mentioned above and the blank in 2 months and 9 days. 12 or more days of which were not worked remain as a remainder of 1 month and 27 days. This all adds up to 3 months and 14 days from the year 37, month of Mesori, day 8, to year 38, month of Author, day 17. This chart from Brugsch summarizes the data of how long it took them to complete the preparation and burial. We find it fascinating that the Egyptians documented so many details like these about the construction of the Serapeum. Interestingly, of the 13 sarcophagi made during the entire Ptolemaic period, only this one in Chamber V was inscribed with hieroglyphics. Out of the 4 total boxes with writings on them, this one by far contains the most and has been called the showpiece of the Serapeum, although it's a bit of a conundrum why its inscriptions were rather poorly scratched into its expertly polished surfaces. It contains panels, false door motifs, and the usual spells from the pyramid texts, and these elaborate dedicatory inscriptions to Apis Osiris. Oddly, its royal cartouches were left blank, which was not that uncommon in ancient Egypt, as there are many other examples of the omission of royal names for different reasons. In this case, it's almost certainly because it was still unclear as to which king would be ruling when this Apis would die, and it was most likely during the dispute as to the primacy of the throne between Ptolemy XII and his daughter Cleopatra VII. This was a chaotic moment in history when kings turned over quite often and at times murdered each other and were exiled, so Dodson said he's surprised they even bothered to inscribe it at all. No other Ptolemaic boxes are inscribed except for this one. For whatever reason though, nobody ever went back to fill in the cartouches after the bull died. They must have done it in a bit of a hurry, as its writings do look like chicken scratch. We must keep in mind though that carving and polishing sarcophagi and inscribing hieroglyphics are very different activities that would have been done by different types of workers, so even though the writing exhibits a much poorer level of craftsmanship than the box itself, it could be explained by the historical context of the moment in which this took place. It was a crazy moment in time when Cleopatra was about to commit suicide and Egypt was about to fall to the Romans, so maybe the Apis priests wanted to make a significant and honorable consecration to their holy god, but did not have much time to do so. Perhaps they even knew what was about to happen and quickly made the largest inscription of all the Apis sarcophagi as a last dedicatory text before their religious cult would soon vanish.
Although Chamber K is positioned first in the Ptolemaic section of the tunnel, it was actually almost certainly the last chamber that was made in the Serapeum. It clearly has a longer and skinnier floor plan than its contemporaries, and it's aligned at an awkward angle. The unfinished box that was abandoned mid-transport in the hallway was almost certainly intended to go into this empty chamber. This incomplete burial was most likely the final urgent and unsuccessful attempt to scramble and bury a final Apis bull before the Romans invaded. Shortly after Cleopatra's death in 30 BC, dynastic Egypt saw its official demise after 3,000 years of perpetuity, and the Romans began their long rule over the country. The first Roman emperor, Caesar Augustus, ordered that the Serapeum be closed down, and the site was sadly abandoned after more than 1,300 years as an active and incredibly important necropolis. We learn from Cassius Dio's book of Roman history that Augustus declined to view the remains of the Ptolemies, although the Alexandrians were extremely eager to show them, remarking, "I wish to see a king, not corpses." For the same reason, he would not enter the presence of Apis either, declaring that he was accustomed to worship gods, not cattle. The worship of the Apis bulls did continue in different forms for another 400 years or so into the Roman Empire, until the time of Theodosius, when many pagan cults disappeared. But this was the sad ending of the magnificent Serapeum of Saqqara. These tunnels were then continually ransacked and raided over the following handful of centuries until it was eventually buried by the desert sands, until Auguste Mariette unearthed it in the 1850s to find it in a state of total ruin.
So there you have it, a clear chronological record of the entire timeline of this amazing ancient site over more than 13 centuries, from the time of Amenhotep III all the way down to Cleopatra VII. After doing this deep dive, we are left with no doubt that the dynastic Egyptians were the people who made the Serapeum. In order to get a full perspective on its history, one must study it in all of its historical context, including the hieroglyphic writings, artifacts, and other burials that occupy the surrounding area of the ancient necropolis of Saqqara. The Egyptians worshipped sacred animals for more than 3,000 years, as they played a major role in the social and religious life of everyone from the king down to the common people. Saqqara also contains many other burials of other important animals, including falcons, dogs, crocodiles, baboons, ibises, and cats, and literally millions of other animal mummies have been found there. The Serapeum is not just a single isolated site. There was actually even a second underground Apis catacomb about half a mile to the north, dedicated to the sacred mother cows that gave birth to the Apis bulls. It's known as the Iseum, as the mother cows were seen as an embodiment of the goddess Isis, the consort of Osiris. That temple was established around the time of Darius I and contained 19 bull burials, as well as a large quantity of falcon and baboons in the adjacent subterranean galleries. This book documents the extensive archaeological work that was done there. A plethora of inscribed stelae found in the catacombs record their names and the details of their lives, as well as the process of excavating chambers and transporting sarcophagi into them. These documents have actually helped to piece together the timeline of the Apis bulls and the Serapeum as well. The mother cows were also mummified and buried in wooden and granite sarcophagi, although they were all destroyed in antiquity. In Memphis, there was also a living temple of Apis, where the bulls were venerated during their lifetimes next to the great temple of Ptah, and archaeologists have also unearthed the embalming house of Apis where they were mummified. There was also another Greek Serapeum just over a half-mile away at the other end of the Sphinx Avenue that was connected to the main Serapeum, yet specifically devoted to the Greek version of the god Serapis. Other Serapeums were later founded in Alexandria, Canopus, and multiple in Rome and around Italy. Other cults also worshipped bulls in ancient Egypt, like at Armont near Luxor, where they buried the sacred Bucus bulls in this catacomb called the Bucaeum, which has a very similar layout to the Serapeum. They were thought to be the incarnation of the god Montu, and were a later rendition of bull worship in Egypt's long history. The Apis bulls were the longest worshipped and the most sacred animal of them all, so of course, with all the wealth and power of the priests and pharaohs, they saw it fit to honor their god with grand sarcophagi made of costly stone and a magnificent underground temple that grew larger and larger as time passed. We hope you now have a better understanding of the bigger picture of the Serapeum and how it fits into the timeline of dynastic Egypt. After hearing all of the alternative theories, we really felt like we needed to do a deep dive on this site, and the more we researched, the clearer the picture became that no lost ancient high technology was needed in its creation. We encourage alternative researchers out there to properly research the subjects you're teaching about, so you don't promote unfounded theories before properly understanding the history of sites like this one.
We really appreciate all of the support we have received from this Serapeum series, and we especially want to give a shout out to Ancient Architects and World of Antiquity for sharing these videos with their subscribers. It really helps our channel out a lot, and we're so grateful that many of you came here from their posts. We also feel pretty baffled by some of the aggressive comments we've received lately. Even though we gave the disclaimer to be nice, some people are still super rude here in the comment section. We totally welcome healthy debate, but we want to encourage you to do so in a respectful and kind manner. We know that some of you think that we're hipster college guys shilling for Zahi Hawass, but we want to assure you that we're just two open-minded people who are interested in the ancient world and looking for answers. which has led us here. If there was a lost civilization with high technology, we'd be excited to learn about it. And we're still open to the idea, but the evidence that we're finding keeps leading us further and further away from that theory. There are still many unanswered questions and mysteries about the ancient world, but many alternative researchers are cashing in on perpetuating the mysteries rather than seeking factual answers, and we've come to see that a lot of the alternative narratives are just baseless claims with little evidence to support them. After doing a thorough study on the Serapeum, which has been called the smoking gun of lost technologies in ancient Egypt, we now look differently towards a lot of the other controversial sites that alternative researchers make outlandish claims about. We are finding more and more grounded answers to questions we have had regarding sites like the Sphinx and the pyramids, Petra, Baalbek, Göbekli Tepe, Angkor, and many other places around the world that we visited and will be making videos on as time goes on. We'd love to hear your thoughts about all this, so please leave a comment and tell us what you think about our investigation of the Serapeum. Also remember to go check out our giant list of references and links in the description below. We encourage you to go do some follow-up research so you can verify what we've presented in this series. Don't just take our word for it, go read up on this stuff yourself. Thank you all so much for watching. We really appreciate you spending your time with us, especially if you watched all 3 parts of this series. You guys are awesome. If you feel called to support us and the work that we do, please consider subscribing to our Patreon page or leaving us a tip in Bitcoin to help pay for all the hours we put into this. We're so grateful for your support, and we'd also love it if you gave this video a thumbs up, subscribed to our channel, and shared our content with your friends. We hope you enjoyed this series, and thank you again for watching. Much love to you all, and we'll see you in the next video. Cheers!